Hello, I'm Ronald Day, Associate Vice President of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including from those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewer, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and to share your comments with us on Twitter at The Fortune Society. Today we have a phenomenal show. Our topic is the additional complexities of domestic violence for people living with chronic health needs. We have great guests, Shannon Young, an advocacy apprentice at the David Rothenberg Center at Fortune. Thank you, Shannon, for being with us. I'll share with our audience a little bit about your bio in a second. And we also have Ann Patterson, Director of Steps to End Family Violence. So, matter of fact, I'll start just by telling the folks about a little bit about you, Ann. So for over 2 decades, Ann has worked alongside survivors of intimate partner violence in an effort to raise awareness of the epidemic of men's violence against women, to educate others and about domestic violence, and to transform the rhetoric and institutions that sustain gender-based violence. Prior to her work with STEPS, Ann worked for the Mayor's Office to combat domestic violence. Ann is a seasoned educator who for years taught at Fordham University's Graduate School of Social Service. Thank you, Ann, for being with us on Both Sides of the Bars. We're excited to have you.
Thanks, Ronald.
And then Shannon Young was born and raised in Virginia. His mother, a woman who worked as a community health counselor, and father, who was a Baptist minister, both instilled in him the importance of committing or being committed to a particular cause. Shannon's love for people initiated his continued commitment to community affairs. Through the years, a brief encounter with the judicial system helped him recognize his calling, which is to be an advocate for people with limited resources. Shannon's passion in helping people speak up for themselves, as well as educating and advocating for people living with HIV. Today, he is completing an internship at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, and HIV and Domestic Violence is his particular platform. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you for
So we have a pretty exciting topic to talk about, which is this kind of like intersection between domestic violence, and you talk about it as intimate partner violence, and that's really critical because a lot of people don't necessarily understand the differences. So, and then again, this intersection with chronic health needs, particularly people living with HIV.
Exactly.
So one of the questions that we want to start with, to kind of like give some foundational information for our guests or for our audience, is how does being a partner with someone who is abusive impact on a survivor's overall health?
Sure.
I think that's a really good question to start with. So why don't I start with you, Ann?
Sure, certainly. So in thinking about the way in which being partnered with someone who's abusive towards you affects your health, it's important to think very individually, but also very holistically. Sure. It's going to have a different impact on every individual survivor. Survivors are not a uniform group of people. They have as much diversity as any other group of people. But being partnered with someone who is abusive towards you can impact your sort of emotional well-being, your psychiatric health, and I think what's most underlooked, your physical health as well. So there's the natural and obvious threat to your physical well-being that may be a result of physical violence that your partner uses against you. But there's also just the emotional strain of being partnered with someone who's abusive towards you, and the constant vigilance and awareness that's required to just survive with someone who's abusive towards you, and how just that constant awareness can take away from the effort and the energy you would need to take care of your physical health. It can potentially compromise your immune system. If you are HIV positive and your immune system is already compromised, it can make you more vulnerable to infection or sort of other consequences that come with having a doubly compromised immune system. And those are just a real sort of a basic peek into how an abusive partner's violence can affect the survivor's health.
Thank you. I mean, it's great actually that you shared that, again, foundational information, because sometimes people understand these things separately, but they don't understand the relationships between the violence that might happen to someone who's already dealing with the chronic condition, whether it be HIV or something like that. There's a related question for you, Shannon, and is how does living with a chronic health condition, particularly something like HIV, make a survivor more vulnerable, in line with what Ann was saying, to targeted abuse by a domestic partner?
Well, let me just piggyback on something that she just said. You know, that HIV and domestic violence, it intersects by the simple one reason is that a client who or victim who is affected by this may not be able to say no or ask to use protection. That's one of the chronic ways that a person could be infected or made more vulnerable to infection. Also, they may be forced to use multiple partners, as well as the abuse, the direct physical abuse that has during sexual contact. You know, I'm speaking from this from an advocate point of view, and also from a personal standpoint as well, of what I've seen as fact. I do want to, what was staggering to me is because the World Health Organization had put out a percentage of women, men and heterosexual, they put out a public announcement that 38% of victims were women that were being beaten, and this was only a point of them only being reported. Excuse me, and that was a staggering amount to me. And it made me take a greater look at my own situation. When I say my own situation, seeing clients that had come across and had shared with me things that had happened to them. So that's basically, you know, why I've taken a stance, and that's why that has become my platform.
Yeah, we know that a great deal of the violence goes unreported. I mean, people are, as you said a second ago, they might be wary of reporting this information because they fear so many different consequences. They might be tied in so many ways to the person who's the abuser, financially, emotionally. There's so many different things. But can you clarify something for the audience as well? Intimate partner violence, can it come in many shapes and forms?
Absolutely.
Is it, because you know how we talk about violence is not always physical. Can you, for people who don't necessarily know?
No, Ronald, I so appreciate that question. And I think when we talk about intimate partner violence at the organization where I work, Steps to End Family Violence, we really understand it as what's called coercive control. So it's one partner engaging in a series of behaviors that have the consequence of gaining and maintaining power and control over their intimate partner. But that can happen in just an absolute infinite number of ways. I think the media representation is physical violence, may there be hitting or pushing. Sexual violence, I think, is often understood to be a form of intimate partner violence. Forced sex, and as Shannon was talking about, or coercion into having sex with partners outside of your relationship.
Exactly.
But there also are those other behaviors that we can all imagine have a really demoralizing effect on survivors. The constant insulting you around your parenting abilities, the degrading your physical appearance, and just there's also these tactics that are either called gaslighting or crazy making, where your partner is constantly challenging what you know to be truth.
Exactly.
And that really can destabilize your sense of self and really make you question what you know to be true and what they say is false.
Yeah, to stabilize your reality.
Exactly. And so when your reality has been destabilized, that affects your perception of yourself, that affects your relationships with your children, with your
outside.
Exactly, your beloveds, your parents, your people that you work with. And that also can be one of those sort of obstacles to talking to other people about your partner's behavior, because your partner may have convinced you that in fact nothing here is wrong.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And that leads me to the next question. How do you know when something is wrong? Because in order to provide the support that individuals need in order to help change their lives so that they can get out of an abusive relationship, what are some of the warning signs?
Someone who's overly jealous, someone who, as she said, questions your parenting skills, someone who makes you feel less than at all times, someone who makes you feel as though you're never right, that they're always right. There are other...
But how do I or someone else who's outside of the relationship? So sometimes
How do
those
they
things can
pinpoint, though?
happen.
How do they
Yeah.
point that
Sometimes
out?
those things can happen in public, but sometimes they necessarily happen in private. Are there some things that the person might let slip out? 'Cause sometimes people try to disguise things. If they've been hit, they try to put glasses on. If if they're being abused, they are like trying to make excuses for the abuser.
I believe that advocates as well as friends and family have to ask certain questions, and they have to be straightforward about it. Are you being abused? Have you been hit? Are you being pushed? Are you being made to do things that you don't want to do? Are you economically being suffocated? Are they allowing? Is he taking control of the money? Is he need to know your every whereabout? Those things that from the outside looking in, a person may not pinpoint because that almost looks normal. Someone who's being affected by intimate partner abuse often feels as though the situation isn't out of control until someone outside of that, from the outside looking in, may pinpoint it. If you see them constantly, fixing eye makeup, covering bruises, making excuses, if the norm for their behavior has changed out of the norm as far as their daily routine, ask questions.
So, Ann, if I make those observations and I know, or at least sense that something is awry in the relationship, what do I do?
Yeah.
Because how sometimes you try to support the person and they might turn on you, or like, what are some tactics that we can employ to help a person who might be in a situation like that? Because someone is going to watch this episode and they're going to say, wow, that's my sister, wow, that's my brother, or that's my uncle.
Well, I so appreciate what Shannon was saying, in that when you have someone in your life and you believe that they are partnered with someone who is abusive towards them, I think it's a real demonstration of love and bravery to ask them directly, tell me about the relationship. What's going on between you and your daughter's father? Let's talk a little bit. I'd love to hear more about that relationship. How does that feel to you? How are you feeling in that relationship? And when we talk about intersection, a way in which surviving intimate partner violence and having a chronic illness intersect is also the intersection of two different sources of stigma. That survivors of intimate partner violence we still live in a society that is pretty actively victim blaming and blames survivors for their partner's behavior. And so when you have been taught to believe, not only by your partner, but by the society that surrounds both of you, that in fact you're responsible for their behavior, there is a real understandable urge to stay quiet, because you feel like that's a real stigmatized identity. So ask those direct questions, but listen with non-judgmental ears, and listen with ears of compassion, with love. And when people are talking about their relationship with their partner, be with them, bear witness to them, believe them, and continue to show up for them. It's not going to be a single conversation.
Absolutely.
You know, another thing that I've always that I found to be absolutely a big factor is that through intimate partner violence, it becomes the norm because because a person has it started either from childhood, and that's just what they're used to, so they don't realize that the reality is that that's not normal, so they look at it as being the norm, or either they just get to the point where they just are not comfortable sharing the information. So I found out that a lot of times you have to dig a little deeper when you suspect and ask, and just blank ask the questions, you know, and when you don't ask the questions, they don't get answered. And intimate partner violence has a way of cloaking itself across the board. And I found that to be true even in my own life at time to time.
Absolutely.
And you both have talked about this intersection between intimate partner violence and chronic health conditions, and you mentioned and that someone's immune system might be much more seriously compromised, whether the person has HIV or some other illness. I mean, if you're sick, you're sick, particularly emotionally from the harm that is happening, or physically or psychologically from the harm. Are there specific signs that are on that side?
Yes.
So in addition to, well, I see something here around the violence, but what about the chronic health issue? Like, do I notice, is it that someone's eating habits might change? Is it that, you know, people are really like stressed and they don't call you anymore? What are some of the things to be on the lookout for?
One sign that I do know of, especially for people who are HIV positive, is the viral load and T cell count may drop. They may not be taking their meds properly, and the doctor will see it. He will see a drastic change in what the viral load is. The viral load will be higher, and the T cell count will be lower. And that's just basically public information. You know, when a person is not taking their meds, they can become resistant. Through intimate partner violence, the person may be taking their meds. I'm not allowing them to take them. He may be selling them. They may be underlying drug issues that may occur. So those are some of the signs and symptoms to look for as well.
And would anything else? Because one of the things that came to mind is, like, when some people might not even go to the doctor. They might. It might be a situation where your partner is like blocking you from doing certain things that actually would help facilitate your continued health. So, any other like things that you notice?
Sure. I think that's such a thoughtful question too, to think about. If we have someone in our life and we believe they're partnered with someone who's abusive towards them, how is this manifesting in their physical health? And what might be these indicators that their physical health is being compromised by their partner's violence? All of us know if when we are chronically stressed, we find that we're getting more colds, right?
Yes,
that we
more
find
tired.
that we're more susceptible to infection, you know, that we find that we're sleepier, and so I feel like those are also could be sort of sparks for conversation. And maybe it could be an easier way to begin that conversation. You're not leading with, tell me about your relationship with your partner, but you're saying, hey, I've been noticed that you've had a lot of colds lately, or like a lot of summer colds, or that you've missed a handful of days of work, and I know that's not like you. What do you think that's about? Is there ways that I can help you? Is there ways that you and I can work on being well together? So I think those are good things to look out for.
Yeah, I think those are some really insightful suggestions that you just mentioned, because you think about people that might be watching this and having all different types of experiences themselves or someone else. It's like, well, what do I look out for? And you said you've worked with people who've been HIV infected for a long time.
For years, for many years. And the reality is that when they not take their meds, it's going to show. Your T cell count is going to drop, and your viral load is going to rise. That's one of the main physical aspects that a doctor will see right off. Also, you know, what I've also found out is that when when they say the underlying issues might be drug abuse. That's where when people are being abused, they start to internally abuse themselves. So therefore, that's one of the objectives they may turn to. And the way you can tell that is they may not take them. They're not going to take their meds. When you're using drugs, you don't take your meds. When you're using drugs, you don't see the doctor. So when there's a doctor's appointment set and a person isn't going, that needs to be investigated by either the healthcare provider, by family members and friends. They know, when you have a person in your life that's supportive and you have a supportive support system, people are gonna know when that's not being followed up on. So you have to follow up on it.
Can you, since you've been doing this work for quite a long time, without of course sharing names, is there like a situation that you can talk about where you worked with someone and there was like a really phenomenal like outcome from the work that you do at Steps to End Family Violence?
Certainly, I mean, I would, and I imagine both of you would say the same things as well. I think that when survivors of intimate partner violence seek our support and continue to show up sort of week after week, sort of like bearing their pain and committing to the therapeutic relationship, that feels enormously courageous and hugely successful. But I think that we see the most life-altering victories in the work that we do with criminalized survivors. So we work with survivors of intimate partner violence who have been arrested as a result of their efforts to survive or resist their abusive partner's behavior. So this might be survivors whose actions result in the death of their abusive partner as a result of using survival violence, or survivors of intimate partner violence who have been arrested because their abusive partner has coerced them into committing pretty serious crimes. And some of the greatest triumphs we have seen, that when women have endured 3 long years at Rikers Island, separated from their parents, separated from their children, completely isolated from their community. And as a result of their tenacity and their persistence and their support from us and their attorneys' willingness to really present their trauma narrative as the context for which their behaviors took place, and to see a jury listen to that, hear that, and bring back an acquittal, those are moments I will never forget. And those are moments that I hold on to when the oppression feels so grinding and the mountain that criminalized survivors have to climb seems so high. I hold on to the fact that these acquittals can come, as infrequent as they are, as a result of the work that we do. So those are a grand triumph, but really amazing ones.
And I wanted you to share that because, again, someone who's watching might be in a situation where they're wondering, like, what might this look like for me?
Right.
Because you can talk about some of the nuance of how it is for people while they're in it, but we want people to see what it's like once you're on the other side.
Yeah.
Because there's a saying, this too shall pass, and even though you're dealing and enduring some violence, or someone who is family member, what have you, I want to say there is, if you seek help or you have support on the other side. One of the things that we like to talk about as well is like recommendations. How do we change some of this? How do we put ourselves in a situation where we could have less violence happening in the household? I know that's a much grander topic and that's a whole nother thing, but for someone who's in a situation like that, Shannon, like what do you suggest people do? What recommendations do you have?
Well, first of all, the first thing, if you're being violated and you feel that you are, especially physically, dial 911. But also the other steps to take to feel safe, and ask yourself some questions. Do I feel safe in my home? Am I being made to feel uncomfortable? Is my partner abusive to me verbally, psychologically? Is he withholding you,
or she,
or he, or yes, or he or she? Let's not make a mistake. Both men and women can be abusive, But my point is that you need to know, a person has to know within themselves that they feel safe internally as well as externally and psychologically. If someone thinks that they don't know, they need to have a conversation with a counselor, family, friends, minister, anyone that you feel comfortable talking to, and let them know what is actually happening. And you have to know what questions to ask, and I think I brought that up previously. Ask someone, are you being hit? Are you being stalked? Are your kids being, abused? Are you being psychologically abused? And psychological abuse is being screamed at, made to feel less than, but your self-esteem put, on guard. You must feel safe within your own self. That's just a God-given right.
Yeah.
So we have about 2 minutes left or so, and I'd love for you to share some recommendations with us as well.
I think Shannon's point is perfect. You don't have to bear your pain alone. That if your partner is being abusive towards you, and you can turn to friends or family. If that doesn't feel safe, if your partner is very connected with your friends and your family, there are advocates like me and tons of other advocates all across the city. The city has a 24-hour domestic violence hotline. I'll give that number. It's 1-800-621-4673. That's the 24-hour New York City domestic violence hotline. You need someone to talk to. You want to have some questions about domestic violence shelter. You want to learn about resources in your community. That's the place to call.
Thank you. And can you give the number one more time?
I will give it one more time. It's 1-800-621-4673. You can also call 311 if you forget that.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Ann. This was a very, like I said, insightful conversation, and I'd love for us to continue it.
Yeah.
So thank you to our guests, Shannon Young and Ann Patterson, for joining us on both sides of the bars today. And thank you in TV Land for joining us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Ronald Day as we critically look at both sides of the bars.